about 30 years later. Now, why did, and then it was expanded repeatedly in the 9th and 10th century. Why would you think that it took 30 years before Abdurrahman I, who, the Umayyad prince who escaped the massacre of his family in Syria and set up an emirate in Spain, why do you think it would take him 30 years before he decided to commission a mosque?
Is there a war?
Excuse me?
War?
War, yeah, well, war with whom? I can't hear, with the, okay, war with, you're right, war with, he was struggling with the people who were living on the Iberian Peninsula, who weren't all that enthralled to have a bunch of guys from, Syria coming and taking over their land. And so there were a whole lot of battles. And, when you're fighting for your life, you don't start saying, oh, the first thing I'm going to do is build a mosque, necessarily. The first thing you get, something like that. He was not an elderly man. Now, a lot of people say that this mosque had Syrian influence. That, and you remember from yesterday how I hated the word influence. So the question would be, is that true? Do you think that's true? That because Abdurrahman remembered his childhood in Syria, he said, oh, I'm going to build a mosque that looks like one that I remembered from Syria. Now, what do you think? I mean, first of all, it assumes that he was an art historian, or at least an architectural historian, that he cared about such things. Second of all, it assumes that he had a vocabulary that he could explain to the local workmen what he wanted. And I think that this is all, again, wishful thinking based on our modern perspective. This guy said, just like at Kairouan, I'm going to build a mosque with local materials, and basically it was a place, a mosque consisted of a covered and open and covered spaces oriented towards Mecca and the Kaaba in Mecca, where it was appropriate for people to pray and in rows. So we have these two poles in the Maghreb, or the Western Islamic lands, that is Kairouan and Cordova. What about what was going on in between? Notably, all of Algeria and Morocco. We know very, very little about that, though archaeologists are discovering more and more. So, for example, at Volubilis, here in Morocco, we know that there were Muslims. There was a Muslim settlement because archaeologists have noted that there was a shift from raising pigs to raising sheep, and they have interpreted that as a change in the diet as Muslims came to predominate in the society. But as we know, it wasn't a question of like poof, everybody suddenly turned to be a Muslim. It was a question of slow transformation. There are two buildings at Volubilis that have been tentatively identified or possibly identified as being mosques, but it's not quite sure. So we really don't have a lot of evidence. Sheila and I were lucky to go a couple of years ago to Ahmad, which is near Marrakesh, and where the remains of a mosque have been discovered. A very, very simple structure. It doesn't have columns. Why doesn't it have columns?
It was hot weather.
No. Well, it has piers. You see these the bases, these square remains would have held up column or piers of stone, square piers of stone. Why no columns? Why no marble columns like in Kairouan or Cordova? Exactly, that Roman settlement hadn't reached that far south in Morocco. The what?
No influence,
No influence.
materials.
Right. Materials. So, I think it's really important to think about these questions of, and how would we imagine that, and so we really, I think archaeology will tell us more and more in the future about this, about the earliest years of the Muslim presence in the region. The monumental history of architecture, monumental architecture, Islamic architecture in the region really begins with the founding of Fez in 780 Idris I, and then it was refounded 2 decades later by his son Idris II as 2 competing cities, each with its own mosque. And those are not, as far as I know, they're known historically through texts, but they've never been seen. And then in the following century, they were replaced by the 2 mosques that we heard about yesterday that were founded by emigres, one group from Kairouan and one group from the Iberian Peninsula, the Kairouiyin and the Andalusiyin. And so these 2 mosques replaced the other 2. Now, I find this story oddly parallel, very parallel and sort of like a wonderful story. I can't say how truthful it is, but the remains we heard about in the Kairouiyin certainly goes back, the founding goes back to the 9th century, and excavations underneath the floor of the present mosque have shown that there was an earlier building. But most of what we see today, or in fact all of what we see today, is much later than the original foundation. It was repeatedly rebuilt and expanded. And we can see here, that here's the plan of the mosque, that the darker rectangle shows the original part of the mosque, and then the expansion is all these areas that are labeled B, B, D, D, etc. Now, why? Why was the mosque expanded? Yeah? Excuse me? Population growth. Okay,
Population of what?
Population of what? Muslims, exactly. And so one of the things you could see, and there were French scholars who did this, they used to plot like how much space an individual needed for praying, how big the space was. And then they would figure out how many meters, square meters that was, and then see, well, this mosque could easily accommodate 100 worshipers, and this mosque, when it was expanded, could accommodate so many more worshipers. And so you were able to, by watching the expansion or plotting the expansion of mosque, you were able to determine how quickly the Muslim population of a region was growing. And this is true, I'm not sure that, you can be quite exact about this and say there were 693 Muslims, who could fit into this building. But I think it gives you some idea of how this region was transforming as it became increasingly an urban Muslim society. And a building like this gives us concrete evidence about the transformations that are happening over history in this region. Of men, Sheila says. Because as we know, that in many cases, women did not participate in the mosque. Another feature of this mosque, which is, we'll just stay with this one for a moment, is what happens on the outside of this mosque? When you think of imagine this building that we're in today, you can describe as being sort of like a piece, a building which is like a sculpture. You can walk around it, and you can see it from all sides, and you can say it has, a big lecture room in the middle and smaller lecture rooms on the side, and this kind of thing. If you were walking around, I assume, have all of you been to the Fez and to the Qarawiyyin Mosque? I've walked around it. How do you describe it from outside? You can't.
Except from the main gates.
Except from there are main gates that you can see it. But so there is no exterior to the building. And so you can see all of this gray area on the outside of the plan. You see, there are streets that run around it, but you can't step away and look at it. You can only sort of walk around it. And also, in many cases, there are things like shops that are built right against the mosque. And if you think of, you couldn't imagine, let us say, this building here with a bunch of shops that, that someone had decided to erect around it. First of all, the academy would refuse and say, no way. But, it's just not the way buildings are built these days. So this is a very interesting idea, and I don't think it's been commented on, that the building is discovered, the building is seen when you get inside. You enter it. And so if you all know, like the Parthenon or something like that we think of architecture as being like the Parthenon, a block, a building that you can walk around and see. And this is one turned inside out, so that it becomes visible only from the interior. And I think this is a characteristic that you find in a lot of very early Islamic architecture across the Muslim world. But it persists longer in the Maghrib. And that really, when you start seeing buildings that have exteriors where you can really see them from the outside, and they're planned to be from the outside, you know something different is happening. So you should all keep your eyes open for that. Now, in the courtyard of the Qarawiyyin Mosque, you'll see, if we go back, that in the courtyard, there is here, C, is the minaret. Now, you remember, if the mihrab of the mosque is here, I assume you all know,
How do you know C? How do you know what C is?
Oh, how do you know what C is here?
How do you know what
What's-
C is?
How do you know what C represents on the plan? Stairs, there's stairs inside, and it's a square structure that has walls.
What's the gray?
And what's the gray?
What is gray tell you?
The gray tells you that's walls.
That's solid.
That's solid construction. And so these are all these piers, that hold up the roof, and these are walls, and there's a stairway going up around a central core. Okay, and this is the minaret. Now, so the mihrab of the mosque is there, the courtyard is here, F, and then in Kairouan, opposite the mihrab, you would have had a minaret, and at Mahdiya, you would have had a portal, and here you have the main portal of the mosque, but it's not monumentalized in the same way as at Mahdiya. So here you have this minaret, which is off to the side, which seems a very odd place. And here you see it in the courtyard behind this later pavilion that was added in the Saadian period. What is this? Does this look like anything you've seen before? Why would a minaret suddenly be built in this mosque over on the side? You got to speak.
Change of dynasty.
Change of dynasty. Well, sort of a change of dynasty. This period, Morocco, or the Maghreb al-Aqsa, was seen as the place of confrontation between two powerful forces, the Umayyads who were in Spain and the Fatimids who were in Egypt. And both wanted to control this region because it was considered strategically important and because of the African trade and bringing gold from Africa, slaves. So these two dynasties, forces, fought with armies over this region. They fought diplomatically, and they also fought through construction. And so the Umayyads of Al-Andalus ordered the construction of this tower. And we know that by an inscription that they put on the building. And it was unlike anything that had been seen before in Morocco. But it was very similar to what had been seen before in Cordoba, which was the capital, where there was a tall square tower. Now, on the right, you see the tower as it exists today when you go and visit the Mosque of Cordoba. But archaeologists and architectural historians have sort of done excavations inside this tower, which is now covered with later cladding to discover that there was a square minaret that was in this tower. And this was going to be a symbol, a sign, as you would, of the presence of Umayyad forces, of Umayyads, Sunni Umayyads in Fez. Now, the Fatimids, who didn't like these towers and didn't build these towers, had another, it was in the 30s or 40s, they were trying to restore the pulpit in the mosque. And they took off the cladding and discovered this original 10th century minbar inside the mosque. And what they found were these panels, the backrest panels you can see at the top here, these two panels. And here they are now in the museum, but they were taken from the mosque. And they're very interesting because they're not in the name of the Fatimids, who we know made this, but in the name of the Umayyads, who conquered. And it turns out that the Umayyads had conquered Fez and taken away the backrest of this minbar, the most prestigious part at the top of the minbar, and taken it back to Cordoba and replaced it with one with their own name in it. So you can see these things, which we think of as, furniture, were really very, very important to contemporaries as signs of sovereignty. Why was a minbar so important? Why did people care about a piece of furniture? What did the minbar represent?
It's not just a piece of furniture, but historically speaking, mosque first is a bit of a decision for making.
Yeah, you need to turn on your mic.
I said that historically speaking, a mosque is not just a place for prayer. It's a place for decision making. It's a place where they gather, decision makers gather and make decisions, big decisions, political decisions, economic, whatever decision was taken there. So minbar is a place where announcing the decision. So it has a place. So it's not just a piece of furniture, but it's a place, it's a state, I would say.
Absolutely. And the minbar was pulled out on Fridays at noon prayer for the khutbah. And part of the khutbah was the affirmation of the ruler's name, that the sermon was given in the name. So it became, like coinage, a sign of where the community saw who was in charge. And so in this fight between the Fatimids and the Umayyads, they're constantly manipulating these symbols using for power. Exactly. So, it's a very, very interesting time. But we have only little fragments that allow us to reconstruct this. There should be lots more. We don't have, let's say, the first minbar from the Kotabiya Mosque. We don't have. And so we should try and constantly think what we have and what we don't have. So so this takes us to about the year 1000. And in the early 1000s, the Caliphate of Cordova, which had been extraordinarily brilliant, collapsed and dissolved, fell apart into a series of local principalities that are known as the Mamlukah Tawaif, the so-called party kings, which I always think of as sort of like they all had a good time and, you know, danced and drank and stuff like this, but they're little like political parties or something. But all city-states focused on individual regions. And then in the 1040s, the Almoravids, the El-Murabitun, arrived and came from what the region further south in the region, and migrated north and conquered all of what is now Morocco and southern Spain. Eventually, they ruled from 1040 to 1147. So basically, for a century, they were in charge. This is the first time that an African dynasty ruled both sides of the Straits of Gibraltar. And we should think, I know today we think of the Straits of Gibraltar as a separation between Africa and Europe, but they are also a bridge between these two regions. And it's that a few miles or a few kilometers of water was not enough to stop a lot of ideas and people moving back and forth. And so this is although the Umayyads tried to conquer and rule from Al-Andalus, the north of Morocco, it was really the Almoravids who were able to make the bridge and really rule effectively. None of their mosques, they were great mosque builders, but none of their mosques survived in Morocco. Certain parts of buildings survived, we'll show, but no complete mosques. So we'll start with the complete mosques that survive in Algeria, and then we'll look at the ones in Morocco. The oldest one from the late 11th century is a small village mosque in the city of town of Nadroma, which is near Tlemcen. And it's a very, what do you see in this building? What in this plan? Can anyone, what are the parts of the building? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think that the gate or the entrance is in the extreme right.
The entrance is on the extreme left.
Left, then. So
there's an entrance here. One here.
Okay, so the minaret is in the extreme left.
Right.
That one with the stairs.
Yep. What's that? A square what?
Courtyard.
It's
Courtyard.
a yard. It's a court or a
Courtyard.
yard.
Open, no
Open.
room.
Open space.
Air.
Air, right, air, okay.
Courtyard.
And mihrab,
Mihrab.
and this long, narrow,
For the minbar. For minbar.
for the minbar. Now,
What's this thing on the bottom left?
what's, what's this?
Just for the direction for.
At the Qibla.
No. For the north or east. And
North,
so for the
north. So you know what the kiss to the, if you,
Where's north?
where, north is that way. So the Qibla is going to be southeast. Yes? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the wall of the minaret here, you see this one is thinner and that one is thicker. What does that tell you? The minaret wall, this is a thin wall, this is a thick wall because you see it's all gray.
There was some reconstruction renovation.
Renovation. In fact, the minaret didn't belong to the original mosque. And this is a character, oops.
What are they looking
What are you looking at?
How
Well,
do you describe that?
so what, that we know is what? An arch. And what kind of arch is it? It's called a horseshoe arch, exactly. Okay. And then,
On,
and what are these
carried
things?
on,
What are those things?
supported on?
Pillars or, not columns, which are round always, but piers right, piers or pillars. And it's very, very simple. There's very little decoration. I find it, lovely, but it's not. I think when for example, when the French came and saw these things, I think they were struck by how beautiful they were. That this reflected a very modernist Corbusier, and they really saw in this a kind of purity that they did not see in fancy European architecture.
What's the guy standing there? Why do we have this person in the picture?
Well, why?
No, I know.
Why? Sheila wants to know, why do we have this guy
Standing in the picture.
stand?
What's he there for? There's a purpose. Yeah, exactly, for scale.
Right. Someone actually wrote in a review of this book that you've been passing around that it was nice to see pictures with people in them, because most architectural photographs are taken without people, and buildings are inhabited by people, and they also, photographs give scale. Now, I will say rather proudly that most of the photographs you're seeing I took over the years. We went in, this was in the 70s, and we thought, oh, Algeria, we're going to come back, so I won't take too many pictures. And I've never had the chance to go back, so that you should take advantage, they say, of your time, having your phone with you, take a picture. You never know when you're going to use it. Or make hay while the sun shines, take advantage. Okay. So in Algiers, now the capital, there was a much larger mosque. So now you're going to see what features are the same as the Nadroma Mosque. This is built 1097, I think. So what's this? Okay, where's the entrance? Okay, mihrab.
Someone said it.
What?
Dome.
Dome, yep, there's a dome here.
How do you know that's a dome? No. Yeah. Why is
So
why
what?
is it dotted? Why are the lines of the dome dotted? They're not solid lines. They're made of.
No, well, it's showing, it's a way,
Because it's down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's up, but yes, it's a ground plan, so everything's solid.
on the ground, and then it's showing what's happening above. Again, the closet for the minbar, there was a little storeroom here, the mihrab. And in the mosque, you can see in the interior, what's the same or similar? The arches, yeah.
What kind of arch?
What kind of arch? Horseshoe. But do you see anything different? Yeah? The pillars, well, they're pretty much the same. But what's going on? The chandelier, yeah. That, I think, is a later addition. But what about on the left?
Yeah, the arc is decorated.
Yeah. Okay, so what you're seeing is Yeah, here, we're dealing with this arch here and this arch here. This whole line, and there's a little bit of it there. There's a whole line of arches that we can see that, and I believe it's this one. Here, I have to go back. Oh, wait, here, I have to go back. This whole line of arches has scallops on it, that these little cutouts. So,
Make sure they understand the dots,
so
dotted lines. What are these dotted lines
these dotted
showing?
lines show arches going across.
Because the arch is not at the ground. It's
The arch is
above.
up above, so there's another line of arches. And then there are arches that go this way, but there's no arch, let's say, between here and there. And what this is, what this is showing here in the interior of the mosque with these is that the builders are using arches to orient the space, that it all looks like they're plain white arches and stuff, but they're using these scalloped arches to focus your attention towards the Qibla. That this is a way of creating a sort of hierarchy of space within the mosque that focuses the worshipper's attention in one direction and not in another. Now, the other thing you would notice if we go back to the plan is the minaret, and this is, what do you think this is? And I didn't bring a photograph of the outside of this mosque, but it is a porch, a veranda, which has nothing to do with traditional Islamic architecture. And it was actually added in the 19th century when the French destroyed a lot of buildings and they saved the columns from some building and decided to build a veranda in the front of this mosque. Why?
Why would,
Extra prayer, like Friday.
What was that?
extra prayer for
Extra?
Friday?
No, I don't think so. I think, why would they?
A fence?
A fence? No, it's open. It's like an open porch. What was the nature? What is the nature of the different nature, the Parthenon and the Parthenon turned inside out? Remember talking about inside, outside? What did this give the building that it didn't have before? A face, a facade. It gave the building an outside.
To be seen from the
Yeah,
outside.
exactly, to be
Gave
seen.
it a French look.
A slight, well, not necessarily. It was more sort of like orientalizing, but it was the idea that you should, you know, Europeans thought buildings should be seen from the outside. So this is a very important difference. But the minaret, which was added in, again, was also added at a later date, but not in the medieval period, because again, the Almoravids did not normally put minarets. Yes?
Professor, this specific idea, does it have to do with the conservative beliefs of the Muslims?
The idea of minarets?
Like covering the outside and...
No, I don't think so.
So it
I mean,
has nothing to do with it?
I think my sense is that it has to do with there's a persistence of a notion of the interior that, you know, it's not good to show off too much on the outside. And so for those of you who've visited, let's say, the madrasas of Fez, I mean, you walk along the street, there's a fancy portal, but then the splendor is inside. It's not showing off. And this is very different from, you know, mansions and stuff where you want to show, you know, people want to show off their goods to the outside. Yeah. Do you, yeah.
Yeah. Concerning these points of the outside of the facade, it's not only for mosques, especially in Old Medina. If you go, for example, to Fez, to Meknes, here in Rabat, not only mosques, but also riyads. So from outside, you don't know, you can't see or spot the wealth of the family.
Right.
Until you get inside. So it's a concept that people at that time were living with. So I should not exhibit my wealth and my richness only when you are inside. So from outside, we are all the same. Or all, I should not show my social or financial status at that time.
Right.
And this goes also for the mosque. So I think that from outside, there should be all together in the same aspects. And until you get inside, then you can discover what you'd like to discover.
I mean,
So it's not. It doesn't have to do with being conservative or not, but it was a mindset at that time, respecting others, those who are poor, not poor. So that was the idea. I don't think that they were believing that the evil eye. So
Because the prophet was like very modest, in fancy clothes and stuff. So
right. But you know, the point is that I mean, what you're saying, all saying is right. But there are other places and other times where people did make fancy facades. So in Cairo, for example, in the Mamluk period, the rulers all vied to make the exteriors of their buildings fancier and fancier, with big inscriptions saying, you know, how important these people were. They were putting it out on the street. And this is true in other places and in Iran and stuff. And that, yes, there are, but I think it's important to understand that this is a particular characteristic of this region, of a certain kind of interiority, of a modesty, of outside. That doesn't mean you don't show it off inside, but you certainly are modest. And this, you're right, it's not only mosques, but also houses too. So here we're there, okay, oops, yeah. So the Almoravids who founded, the Almoravids who founded Marrakesh, they built a mosque, a very big congregational mosque, on the site of the present Ben Yusuf Mosque. And archaeologists have found some remains of walls from the mosque. There was some evidence of a minaret, which is strange, but I don't understand it. But anyway, that's what they said was there. But and the present Ben Yusuf Madrasa is here on the site. And you can see, first of all, that there has been a change in opinion about something very important in this.
What's the difference?
What's the difference between this present Ben Yusuf Mosque and the old Ben Yusuf Mosque? Direction, exactly. So that there is the,
Show them.
so
Where do you
the
pray?
Qibla would have, in the present one, is almost due east, whereas the one of the ancient one was due south, sort of more southeast, and the Ben Yusuf Madrasa has a Qibla that is even further to the southeast. So, I mean, this is also something, and why is that?
Why did the Qibla shift?
Why did Mecca didn't shift, so why did the Qibla shift? Why did the Qibla shift? How does someone determine the Qibla?
How do you figure out where Mecca is? Now you have a watch.
How do you figure it out?
The sun.
Excuse me?
By the weather.
The sun, okay. Well, no, it turns out that there are two major ways of figuring out the Qibla. There is one way which is sort of the traditional way, which is like the Mosque of Sidi Oqba in Kairouan was established by the traditional way, which is that Sidi Oqba did not really know where the Qibla was, but he had a way of figuring it out, which was that it is said he would remember that when you looked in the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca, at a certain time, you would see stars in a certain position. And yet, at the same time, there is enormous development of scientific knowledge and of mathematical knowledge in the Muslim world about spherical trigonometry. That is, how do you find the distance and the direction of one point to another point on the surface of a globe. And that is a scientific method. So in our modern sense. And so what you have here are, over the course of centuries, just as we've seen mosques reflecting growth of population, we have orientation of mosque reflecting different degrees of knowledge about how to position oneself and what's accurate. And basically, they kept fighting about it over and over the years. Anyway, the only part of this, this building, this extraordinarily large building in Marrakesh, their capital in Morocco, that has survived is this small pavilion, which is known as the, known as the Qibla al-Badiin, or Baroudin, which was originally the ablution pavilion outside the mosque. And I'll just go back for a moment to show you that, you see, it's oriented at a different direction from the mosque.
Why?
Why was it oriented at a different direction as the ablution pavilion? Why is the orientation of this little square, the black square, different from that one, from the one of the contemporary mosque that it was attached to? Why wouldn't you have an ablution building built, if it was built at the same time, wouldn't it be in the same direction? What do you do in an ablution pavilion? Wash. Right, you don't want to do it in the direction of the Qibla. So,
It's a deliberate change.
So this is a deliberate change, okay. And so this building is the only part of this mosque.
We know, therefore, that this was not a religious building.
Right.
Because it's in a different direction.
But inside, and it looks sort of like a little nondescript building from the outside.
City around it.
And why is it so deep in the ground? No. What's happened over the last 800 years? What is Marrakesh built of? What kind of buildings? What are the buildings made of in Marrakesh? Clay. And what happens when a building falls down? Do you get a truck and take away the clay? You pat it down and you start building a bed. And so over the centuries, the ground level has risen that much around this building. So this is another way that you see how the city has changed. So this building was discovered in the backyard of some, in the early part of the 1940s, I think, and was excavated, and they dug down and they found all the waterworks that brought the water to this pavilion. But what's extraordinary is inside, much to their surprise, they discovered this beautiful ceiling, this vault.
So how do you take this photograph? What are you looking at?
What are you looking at? How do you do it? You lie down on your back and you go like that and look up into the ceiling. And you can see that it's sort of like a star. Can you see? It's like a star. But you're seeing all sorts of different, okay. What it has is, it's 8-pointed, right? 1, 2, 3. What's in the middle? Sort of a flower or melon, they call it melon-shaped, okay, with little points. And then there's lots of stucco. This is made of plaster, so stucco decoration. And then there are arches, you see, that go like this, these sort of funny arches that go up and then come down here. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 8 arches that cross to create this vault. It's extraordinarily beautiful, but it's not an invention, but it's really an interpretation of a kind of vault, that was found, yes, thank you, here, over the Qibla of the mosque in Cordova. And you can, Cordova on the right and Marrakesh on the left. And you can see the scalloped central dome, the arches, but the arches here are, this is made of, this is stone and covered with mosaic, with glass mosaic. This is made of plaster,
So
brick
which
and
is
plaster.
imitating which?
Which is imitating which? This was made in the 970s. That was made in the 1130s.
That one. which
Yeah,
is
so,
what?
so this is the imitation. This is the imitation. But it's, again, you have to say, how was this done? How was the imitation made? Someone didn't come, well, I don't know. Did they come with a drawing? Did you send a craftsman? Someone had to learn how to do this. So you pay someone a lot of money and you say, come to Marrakesh. And they say, what's Marrakesh? New city, I've just founded it. We have lots of money. You're going to get a great job, high pay, permanent work. Come. And so they come and they bring their ideas. And so this is how artistic ideas move around. It could have been another, I have to say that we only have the one in Cordova that survives. There could have been others in Al-Andalus, there could have been others, but we have no evidence. So it was either Cordova or something like Cordova. Here are two details. One here of, there, of this is the Qibla in Marrakesh. And you can see that there are scallop shells and plasterwork, but there's also, and these sort of mixed arches with cusps in them. But then here in the background, there are these stalactites or muqarnas, which are a distinctive feature in Islamic architecture that appear around this time. And there's a lot of controversy about how and where they come from. They also appear in the mosque in Tlemcen, which I'm going to show you next, in these corners. They're little bits, and you're going to see them, you can see them in the room where we're going to have our tea in a little while. They had already appeared somewhat earlier in Algeria, as I said, at Tlemcen, but this is showing how these ideas are coming both either from the west or from the east as the Almoravids are gathering the greatest talent to work on their projects. The mosque at Tlemcen is much bigger than the mosque at Algiers. It's more complex. Here we go. It has an unusual plan because there was a building here, the Palace of the Ruler, so it couldn't be as rectangular as, and so this area was sort of kept. They said, well, we're not going to take the governor's palace, but it has the courtyard. The minaret is a later addition, the mihrab up here, and it has a dome in the middle of the prayer hall and another dome in front of the mihrab. The interior, what do you see about the interior that's different from what we've seen before? How is the building supported? What is used to support the? Both columns. Now, what do you have more of? Pillars. We have more pillars. Why? It's big.
Very big.
Is it reconstructed?
No. Because the columns, yeah,
I may say that there is less Roman influence.
well,
Good point, but
Good-
no influence.
right, right. What you say, okay, that there was a Roman site at Tlemcen called Pomerania. Okay, and there were columns, some columns, but not a lot of columns. And columns, this is old stuff. This is prestige material. This is, okay. So you take it, you save it, and you use it in special places as kind of decoration. But basically, if you need to keep the building up, you use your piers.
What is a column?
What is a column?
What is a column? What physically is a column? Pardon? No, just what is it physically? Describe it. Marble. What? One piece of marble, or sometimes several pieces, but large hunks
Chunks of marble.
of marble.
And it's a kind of specialized, you have to cut the marble out of the rock, out of the mountain or whatever, and it's a lot of work. And so when people found them that weren't broken, they said, let's use these and and decorate our buildings. Now, they also did a lot more decoration, and you can see here that you have this same cusp arches along with the horseshoe arches. So the cusp arches, and this increased, there is increased use of these arches to decorate and shape space, to point you in the right direction. And this culminates in the area around the mihrab, where you have the most lavish decoration, with scallops, and you can see that the arch of the mihrab, and then the decoration around it, and you can see how the decoration has been subtly changed so that to allow for the closet for the minbar to be put into place. So it's all very carefully planned.
Where are the columns?
And why are the columns here on either side? And there are more columns there. Why are they putting columns there?
Provide more support, also decoration.
What part of the mosque is this? Mihrab. It's the important part. For concentration, it's not. They're not worried about supporting the mosque here. What they were worrying about is making it as beautiful and as important as possible. And the culmination of this,
It's like exclamation points.
right? The culmination of this is the dome over the mihrab, which is another one of these rib domes, but this time you have it pierced. It's brick arches that are covered in plaster that are pierced plasterwork, so the light can come in, and that there's another roof above with windows in the walls that lets the light come in from outside and come down. Why do you do that?
To highlight the imam.
Exactly. It's sort of like in a pre-electricity age, having a spotlight over the imam. I mean, this is really sophisticated work. Now, we have to imagine, the reason I'm showing you this mosque in Algeria is this is it was an important city, but it was not as important as Marrakesh. So you have to imagine that this mosque, this now disappeared mosque in Marrakesh, was quite as important, but it didn't survive. Okay, yeah, move on. There. And this also, it was so inspirational, and so important that that it inspired it, that builders in the Marinid period, so several centuries later, saw this dome in Tlemcen and decided to put one in Taza, in the mosque in Taza, when they rebuilt the mosque in Taza, or expanded the mosque in Taza in the Marinid period. So it's the same kind of pierced dome. Okay, we really should move on because I've got lots to, and some fun thing to show you. So the Qarawiyyin Mosque gets expanded in this period with a series of vaults. When the mosque is expanded, they put up these muqarnas vaults leading up to the mihrab. Again, emphasizing the mihrab. And here are the vaults. Here's one of them, and another one. And they are, the interesting thing about these is they are in the most prestigious mosque in the city of Fez. The most comparable structure, most like it anywhere in the Muslim world, is not in the Muslim world at all, but is in Palermo in Sicily, where at exactly the same date, artisans erected a wooden vault, very much like the one in the ones in Fez, over the royal chapel of King Roger II. Why would they put a Muslim muqarnas vault in a Sicilian church? Yeah?
Because it's aesthetically pleasing.
It's aesthetically very important. Yeah. Anything else? And? Yeah?
Maybe, which country is it?
Sicily, so
Italy?
Italy, in Italy.
That one is Palermo in Sicily. This is the Cairolian.
Okay, so maybe for the one in Sicily, it's there is a Muslim minority. So he wants to show that he cares about this minority.
Well,
Maybe it's a minority.
I think you're right about the Muslim minority, or maybe even a majority at that point. I mean, there's the Normans who come from France who are conquering Sicily, which had been ruled by Muslims. But it is that, and I don't think that there were too many Muslims who went into the royal chapel, you know, where there's a big picture of Christ on the back wall and stuff. But what they did do was they were the workmen. They were the workmen, the people who did the work. And when Roger, who had a lot of gold in his, coffers, said, "I want the fanciest that could be," how do you get it? You hire the fanciest workmen. And this is the latest style that either comes from Morocco or from Al-Andalus. And it's unclear how these ideas moved around. These are questions that remain very much open and understood. As we heard yesterday, when the restoration on the Qarawiyyin Mosque began in the 1950s, the ceilings were covered with paper and white plaster and paint to hide it. And the text had said that the Fassis, who were worried that the Almohads who were coming along would cover up the decoration, the beautiful decoration, in fear. And so you can see on the left there's a photograph showing it before restoration, and on the right it's quite extraordinary. Okay, the Almohads took over in the 1140s, and the earliest of their mosques was at Taza, which had a strategic location going towards the eastern lands now in Algeria. And they built a mosque which, as I just told you, got expanded, but the area within the red box, yeah, you got it, is the original mosque, which is, again, looks very much like what we've seen before, very austere, very plain, with a certain amount of fancy arches, and these are even more complicated arches. These are with little curlicues going, and they have a special kind of name, which you don't really need to know, and a great big chandelier. Yeah. And then the next one, yeah, the interior. Okay, and then go ahead. There's this. Okay, the interior with the curlicue, these arches, once again, used to point the worshiper in the direction, not with any, it's a very subtle way of orienting yourself in the building. The the most the important for mosque that they built was at Tin Mall, which was the spiritual center for the Almohads, up in the high Atlas Mountains. Have any of you ever been there? Yeah. I mean, it's an extraordinary place, and I'll tell you later when we're talking about our first trip there, which was kind of something. But anyway, we went in the 1980s. And when we were talking about Qiblas and stuff like this, I took this picture because I really believe, I don't have any evidence to believe, but I think that there was thought that the Qibla was this mountain behind the mosque, the conical mountain. Somehow, because it's not accidental that the building is oriented towards this place. Anyway, the plan of the building is very similar to that at Taza, except that its minaret is combined over the mihrab and area in a very unusual combination, which I can't explain. The interior of the mosque, we saw, again, you can see how the arches in front of the Qibla wall are cusped to show. And this is how we saw it in the 1980s, and this is how it is in the 2000s when it was restored. If we had more time, because I really want to show you this little cute video, it raises a question about restoration and how much restoration is a good idea. You know, that you want to preserve what's there, but you don't want to reinvent what isn't. There is a Muqarnas dome that survives at this building, and there's the Muqarnas dome, and then the next one will show the mihrab area. And you can see, I think, from all the pictures, this is very similar to what we've seen before, right? Except for one thing that's missing. Pillars, yeah. Well, they're made. They're not in marble. They're in plaster. But what else is missing? Inscriptions, writing. There are no Arabic inscriptions. There are a couple up in the windows, up at the top, that say Barakallah or something like that. But basically, this is really unusual, that for whatever reason, and we're not sure why, the Almohads disapproved of putting inscriptions in mosques. In the Kotabiya Mosque in Marrakesh was originally built, and the first mosque was here, and then a minaret was built at a later date, and a second mosque was expanded at a slightly different Qibla, and no one quite knows why. The second Qibla is worse than the first Qibla.
More inaccurate.
More inaccurate, but I'm sure that the people who built it thought they were doing better, but scientifically it was different. Here is an air view of the building, which was built in the years before and after Tin Mall, the one at Tin Mall. It's much bigger. It's has the Qibla wall still of the old mosque, of the first mosque, still survives, and and here is where the mihrab would have been. This is taken in the 80s, so there are trees, but in the Archaeological Institute in Granada prepared a video, and I don't know, let's see if it plays. Yeah, here. This is just incredible. It turns out that this building had a retractable maksura and minbar. Okay, so what you're seeing is a reconstruction of there was sound, but we're not playing it. But I think I can show you if I'll just step there. That they found that there were excavated holes in in the ground that brought, when you this is a model, that made the walls of the minbar, of the Maqsura, come up when the Sultan came into the mosque to protect him from, the crowds. And it would go down with counterweights that caused it to go down when he left. And then this is all, there are texts that describe this, and they found the foundations that exactly showed how the mechanism would have worked. And then is it known? Yeah. Okay. And then, so here, they're doing, okay, so you can see that they're going down, now coming up between the columns. And they figured out if these were made of wood, how much they would have had to weigh, and then what the counterweight would have had to have been. It's most extraordinary. And here is where the Kotabiya Minbar, which was actually made for the Al-Muravid Mosque, was kept in a closet. And there was a rope tied to the front of it. And when you turn the mechanism behind, here he is turning the mechanism, the rope would pull, okay, that's gonna, yeah. And here you can see, I hope you get
The walls are coming up.
right, the walls are coming up here because of this mechanism. And then here, the door of the minbar closet, and here's a little model of the minbar that's being pulled out. None of this, of course, survives except in the texts or in the archaeology. Here is the mihrab of the very much restored interior of the Kotabiya Mosque with a replacement minbar, because the actual one that was in the mosque is now in the museum, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. The Kotabiya Mosque was also famous for its great minaret, which became, is a symbol of Marrakesh. It too has been restored and has at the top tile decoration, which is some of the earliest tile decoration to be found in the region. And so this is the moment when tiles were added. These tiles, this was an old photograph I took. Now they've all been replaced, but they were actually nailed up. The tiles had holes in them, which were nailed to wooden pieces behind to hold them in place. And in a simple geometric pattern. And this is sort of the local, if you want to look at the granddaddy of all Zalij here in Morocco, this is it. This is the moment. Now we know at some point or other there were painted inscriptions on the plaster of this building, but they haven't really survived. We'll briefly go, look, there was an enormous mosque built in Seville, the other Almohad capital in Al-Andalus, which was an enormous mosque, and of which only the minaret survives, and a doorway, and you can see that the whole mosque was torn down and turned into a cathedral, into a Gothic cathedral, which you see on the side, and a doorway which looks very familiar of the kind of doorway of plated metal doorway that one sees often in Morocco. A bit of a palace survives in Seville, and a bit of military architecture. But to finish, we can, yeah, okay, here you go. Okay, because it was sort of nice to realize that we can sort of finish up with some local buildings, or that although there was military architecture in Al-Andalus, it was very functional and not terribly decorative. But the architecture in Morocco was less functional but more decorative. And so you have the gate of the Qasbah of the Wadayas here in Rabat, with gorgeous stone carving around the entrance. The Babar Ruh here in Rabat, which is rather dark, but it also has gorgeous stone carving, which is much damaged by the wind. And then, of course, the Mosque of Hassan, which was unfinished. And here is a view, both the minaret was unfinished, which was going to be the largest and tallest minaret ever. But the mosque has this unusual plan with 3 courtyards. Why would it have 3 courtyards? Why could it have 3 courtyards? Light. Absolutely. Nobody has ever suggested this. It was not finished. But when you build such an enormous building, it would be pitch black in the middle of it, and it needs light and ventilation. And so so here you're seeing this grandiose, I mean, this is extraordinarily large, as you've all seen. The scale of this, the scale that is...
Nobody ever pays attention, but there's a reason plans have scale.
Right, so it's,
So how big is this?
that is 120 meters wide. Yeah.
That's a football field.
Right. Needless to say, it was never finished, but they did find like roof tiles in the excavations at the site, which suggests that some parts of it were completed. So perhaps the building was used before it was finished. The minaret, which is enormous with its shabka decoration, which is the same cusped arches that we've been seeing before, but have been expanded into space. I think should we stop now? That would be a good point to stop. We can, I have 5 more slides. Should we go on 5? Okay, 5 more. Okay, so this is a detail of the decoration. This so-called lattice network, or which is like decoration, but what it starts out being is there would have originally been columns here, and then you have an arch that goes from column to column, and then, but except that this time the arches are extended up infinitely in space. And you can see that these architects and designers are playing around with these old forms and expanding them and creating these kinds of patterns which you see around yourselves all the time here in Morocco. I mean, it really, this is the moment when this really takes place. In Marrakesh, there is the Bab Agno, which was another gate like the ones in Rabat, but this was the entrance to the palace complex, where there was another mosque, another very odd, strange mosque, the Qibla Mosque, which had a courtyard, not much of a prayer hall, but it had 4 additional courtyards off the main courtyard. And if anyone can tell me why this happened, I'd be very glad to know. Again, the interior of the mosque, looking into one of the small courtyards, looking into down the aisle, and you can see how enormous this is as the Mosque of the Palace. But in the 16th century, the Sadian Sultan had his gunpowder stored very nearby, and there was an enormous explosion, and the mosque was deeply damaged. So the mihrab and the decoration of that area is all post its foundation. The exterior of the mosque is unusual because it was meant to be seen. It is one of the few mosques, and it actually had little niches cut in built in the walls, little shops from the beginning. So it was meant to be seen from the outside. And this is a very interesting, because this is the Palace Mosque. This is, I don't know, what did they sell? Souvenirs? I don't know, but again, it shows how interesting and unusual this was. So that's it. So I hope, this has given you a little bit, yeah.
I'm sorry, but aren't the shops supposed to serve the mosque? The money coming from the mosque?
They could, yes, absolutely. It is possible. We don't know. I don't know if there's a Waqf Habus document for this mosque. Yeah. That usually is the case that this mosque, but if this is the Palace Mosque, the Sultan doesn't really need extra money to support his mosque. I mean, if he's being a good guy, he should be supporting it from his own royal purse, So he doesn't need to. It sounds a little bit like, forgive me, like Mr. Trump, using, trying to selling, So, but I mean,
in Qanitra, and we had a talk about the money coming from the shops. They are used to pay, let's say, the expenses of the mosque, buying furniture, paying electricity bills, and other stuff. But in this context, I have a question.
Yeah.
And that's a question that I have been thinking of since yesterday. I was really, I can say, overwhelmed, and I really, let's say, feeling prouder to be a part of this, let's say, event as a participant, and I would like to thank everyone for giving us the chance to attend it. What made it one of your interests, okay, to have, let's say, I can say you have a long experience more than the Arabs or the Muslims themselves. Yeah, you are.
it's a job. It's my job.
Yeah, I know. Maybe it's a job, but I can say you are doing things perfectly, okay? Right. I was thinking how come to, let's say, I cannot imagine how did you make it to have such, let's say, nice photos that depicts everything.
Well, I only tell the good stories, I only tell what I can show. I mean, as I said, I think I said to some of you, I was an undergraduate. I took a class in this stuff, and I thought it was the most interesting thing I had ever thought of.
Well,
there's so many questions. As you can see, I don't have all the answers. I don't know. And every time you look at this, there's more to question, more, you see things that if you study like Italian Renaissance painting or something like that, it's sort of like, well, did this master paint this earlobe, or did this master, is this a work by this one or that one? And there are very little questions. But here, there are big questions that need to be still answered. And I find it fascinating, intellectually engaging, and beautiful to look at. Of course. Yeah. So I think we should take a break.
So let's go for a break. We have had a good discussion.
Well, one more. Yeah.
In line with my colleague's question, I'm just wondering about the kind of criteria you use or you opt for in order to choose this artistic architecture. For example, you choose this you try to choose some say artistic architecture based on what? Is it I don't know, something that you hear from other people and then you go? So how does this choice, or what is your choice based on?
Well, it's a big question. Well, we'll think about it and we'll talk over it.
Okay.
Because I remember.
Hold it.
I think that's